Hello there and welcome to our special live coverage on ALT24 News regarding tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And we start with the latest events of the 7th day of Russian military operations in Ukraine. Russia's military claims to have taken control of Kherson, a key Ukrainian port city on the Black Sea. Officials say 21 people killed in shelling of Kharkiv and 4 others killed in cruise missile attack on Zhytomyr. Ukrainian officials say a hospital has been attacked and the barracks of a flight school on fire after an air raid, and more than 677,000 people have fled Ukraine since the Russian military operation. The United Nations Refugee Agency says with the number rising rapidly. Still with the same story, Russian military asked civilians in Kiev residing near facilities of the Ukrainian security services to leave. Russian Defense Ministry explained that in order to stop information attacks against Russia, strikes with high-precision weapons will be carried out. Hassan Berkan reports.
Russia's defense ministry said on Tuesday that it was planning to strike targets in Kiev used by Ukrainian security service and warned residents to flee their homes. The first target, a TV tower, was hit in the afternoon.
In order to stop information attacks against Russia, strikes with high-precision weapons will be carried out against the technological infrastructure of the security service and against the main center of the psychological operation unit in Kiev. We call Kiev residents who live near security centers to leave their homes.
In turn, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said in a speech to the European Parliament that the fate of the European Union is at stake in Ukraine and promised to commit at least 500 million euros from the European budget for humanitarian assistance in Ukraine.
The destiny of Ukraine is at stake, but our own fate also lies in the balance. As a first batch, we will now also match this by at least 500 million euro from the EU budget to deal with the humanitarian consequences of this tragic war, both in the country and for the refugees.
It's noteworthy that a convoy of Russian military vehicles stretching 65 kilometers is making its way to Kiev.
And for more insights regarding this, I'm joined live by Julia Roknifad, Assistant Professor, School of Politics, History and International Relations at University of Nottingham in Malaysia. Well, Julia, welcome and thank you for joining us. It's the first time probably Russian military asks Ukrainian civilians in Kiev residing near facilities of the Ukrainian security services to leave. What is the implications of this?
Well, hello, Nadia, and thank you for inviting me. You see, the purpose of this military operation in a way that has been declared on the part of Moscow is that, of course, it's not fratricide. It's not to have as many as possible civilian casualties. So it's only natural that the military on the ground are trying to avoid those civilian casualties from piling up, even though we don't have concrete information from any of the sites on how high is the death toll on any of the sites. But nevertheless, if the Russian military see the necessity to conduct certain actions against objects of civilian infrastructure, then they might have some rationale for that, but they want to avoid at all costs the civilian casualties, and we could see them doing that quite consistently. So I guess that's only an attempt to avoid casualties on the ground.
So you think that it has nothing to do with the media in this case? It has nothing to do with it?
I don't think that the military operation is tied up to the ongoing information war and misrepresentation on facts that has been ongoing on both sides, even though Russia has been losing this information war. The tactics of the operation might have changed, but what affects it is not what's happening on the information battleground, but what's happening on the real battleground, and that is, for example, the fact that the Russian troops have been met quite differently from the experience that they had in Crimea in 2014.
Now let's have a closer look to this operation, as the Russian army said on Wednesday morning that it seized the Ukrainian port city of Kherson, located in the south of the country near the Crimean Peninsula, after fierce fighting in recent hours. Igor Kushenkov, spokesman for the Russian armed forces, said that the Russian army units have taken full control of the city, assuring that the civilian infrastructures and public transport is operating normally. On Tuesday, Russian soldiers fired rockets near a TV tower and targeted a Holocaust memorial site in Kiev just hours after warning of high-precision operations on other Ukrainian security-related installations. The rocket attack, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs, disrupted or disturbed broadcasting equipment. Back to you, Julia, here.
You'd like me to comment on the
purpose? My question is the disruptions in the broadcasting equipment of Ukraine. Don't you think that it comes as a response to banning Russia or RT and Sputnik from European countries? Again,
I wouldn't think that it's this operation is very much tied to what's happening on the information battleground. Of course, Moscow might be upset, but it's just one of the many sanctions that have been undertaken by various parties to this conflict, not only by Ukraine. And I think here it also adheres to more traditional vision of the war, which one of the instruments of that is to cut off the communications. And even during the coups and revolutions and furthermore wars, you would see the adversaries trying to destroy each other's communication systems. And there's been a lot of misinformation flying on both sides. I'm not sure that destruction of this telecom tower would help to quash on all the rest, all the other flows of information that have been flying around, and misinformation, which I think is about 80% of it. So it's just a part of the military, more traditional military operation.
Since we were just speaking about the freedom of speech, let's watch together a video where we are going to see UN Human Rights Council delegates walk out of Sergei Lavrov's speech.
The regime has pursued a course of aggressive de-Russification and forced assimilation all these years. People who consider themselves Russians and would like to preserve their identity, language and culture are being told directly that they are strangers in Ukraine.
Julia, don't you think that what's happening or what happened during the word of Sergei Lavrov means in a way a refusal of freedom of speech and refusal of sitting in, let's say, a dialogue that may bring peace to the Ukrainian-Russian tensions?
Well, it seems like the European counterparts of Minister Lavrov are indeed not very inclined to the dialogue, even though there is one ongoing on the territory of Belarus between Russian and Ukrainian sides. But that would not be the only precedent. The delegates walking out when one or another delegate makes a speech. We've had such precedents at the time when, let's say, when the hostilities were flaring up around the Islamic Republic of Iran, the delegates walking out during the Iranian diplomat's speech. So that wouldn't be the first time. I guess I would see this motion as an attempt to isolate Russia, to show it's an international pariah at all fronts as much as possible.
Well, Julia, I might ask you to stay with us for the rest of the time of the show, since we have our supposed guest, Kim Bang, who was supposed to join us, but apparently we are facing a technical problem from his part and cannot make it so far. So you just keep with us, Julia, and now we move to, while extending support to Kiev in the ongoing Ukraine-Russia conflict, US President Joe Biden has reiterated that US forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine against the Russian forces. Biden's remarks came during the first State of Union address delivered to join a session of Congress at the Capitol. Let's have a listen.
But let me be clear. Our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west.
U.S. President Joe Biden announced during Tuesday night's State of Union that the U.S. will ban Russian aircraft from U.S. airspace, joining a growing number of countries who are closing their skies to Russia following President Vladimir Putin's military operation in Ukraine.
Task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy.
If you are still with us, Julia, do you think that closing airspace in the face of Russian aircraft is the only way to sanction Russia?
It is far not the only way, and there is a plethora of sanctions that's been introduced against Russia, like, for example, disconnection of not the whole of Russia. So far, I think it's 7 banks, and there's a discussion about other banks, ongoing disconnection from SWIFT, and that is from the international financial system. Denial of supplies of various components to technology, variety of industries, like, for example, Boeing and Airbus already stated that they're not going to supply spare parts or help out with the aviation industry in any other way. It spreads to the military sector, to the oil refinery, and so on and so forth. So there is a variety of sanctions. However, I wanted to emphasize that the European leaders and the Joe Biden American counterparts of Russia stating that President Putin will pay dearly for the current action. Unfortunately, with the current sanctions that we're seeing, it's still the people of Russia that are going to pay dearly for the decision to start this military operation. And in order to shift the burden of sanctions towards the political elite, the sanctions should target the political elite and themselves, their assets abroad, and their children living in many Western countries at the moment.
Julia, yes, we are supposed now probably to go live for a live event regarding State Union 2022, where the President of the United States, Joe Biden, is supposed to give a speech, but I don't know if we are ready yet for this or no. Otherwise, I carry on with you, Julia. Do you think that the UN General Assembly is doing enough to appease tensions in this case?
I'm afraid it's not a question of if it's doing enough or not, but it might be just inconsequential, because we already have seen a failure, for known to us and to everyone reasons, failure to condemn and pass on the meaningful binding resolution against Russia. So I don't think moralizing in the General Assembly would have any effect or any consequence. Any consequences that we should be expecting, the results we should be expecting, is from the negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine ongoing in Belarus right now, at least a ceasing fire.
What should have been really the alternative, according to you, Julia?
The alternative to the military operation, or the alternative in exerting pressure on Russia?
In both cases here, let's just put ourselves in the shoes of the Ukrainians and the shoes of Russians as well.
Well, to the military operation, that's a very difficult question, and that's a question that polarized Russian people at the moment. And honestly, if I may be honest with you, it also sours, if to put it mildly, relationship between two brother nations. That's the way I've always looked at them. Many of the Russian middle class, I suppose, would say that they thought there could be another way. And even the very fact that Moscow went at war, that the Putin's administration decided to go to war in the current conditions, when Moscow's demand for security guarantees was not approved, by NATO and by the US throughout the rounds of attempts at negotiations. It means that most likely the military lobby has gotten an upper hand in this decision-making process, and diplomats might have been just sidelined with their more moderate estimates. So many would believe, not the suppressing majority, but nevertheless many would believe there was an alternative to the military operation, and the situation with the security threat, perceived security threat to Russia, was not that dire. As for the means of exerting pressure, as I said, that the UN GA decision, the resolution is going to be most likely just a very symbolic gesture and just an attempt of the, I dislike the term, but of the Western Front, of the anti-Russia front, to mobilize assets, resources, and partners against Moscow. But for the rest, I guess the sanctions will proceed, and I'm afraid that this pressure, that pressure machine that started acting against Russia now, is not going to stop anytime soon, even if we'll see any results in the negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine.
I carry on just a last point here with you, Julia. You said once President Putin has said that I'm always with you, Julia, here. And I wanted to ask you that President Putin has once said, when war is inevitable, you have to punch first. Do you think that it was the only way for Putin to launch this military operation?
Well, as I just said, that the opinions within Russia are polarized about that. And from, you can look at the matter from a variety of vantage points. And I've seen many, even very statist, the very pro-state experts, not to say pro-Putin, but pro-statist experts. They were, they would argue in favor of this Russia's position that it sees NATO expansion and unwillingness to produce those security guarantees that it was demanding for. And from what I understand, both sides were not very much willing to compromise. They were seeing it as a serious threat, indeed, and existent and existential. However, many would also tell you that there was still a window for diplomacy, and probably many experts or diplomats, experts' opinion wasn't listened to in this decision-making process because, we can see what we can see now happening on the ground. It looks like the decision made and lobbied by the military elite, which tends to think quite differently and see the threat as more imminent than it actually is. But I would say, from how it looks from my vantage point, and from what I would definitely like to see, as someone who doesn't support this military operation, that there was still another way and not all options were exhausted.
Thank you so much, Julia. And apparently, Dr. Farkim, founder, CEO of Strategic Pan-Indo-Pacific Arena, has just joined us. And before this, when we start any discussion regarding what's happening and the latest of the Russian-Ukrainian tensions, let's listen to an Algerian-Russian Salah, who had this to say when I asked him earlier about how life is going on in Russia and if there are any fears among citizens due to economic sanctions.
Well, the situation here is okay. Yes, the Russian currency, the ruble, is fallen a little bit with 20 or 25%, but this is normal. It was the same thing as 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. People, yes, some people are worried because there is a lot of fake news on the internet. For example, there is in Ukrainian anonymous who sent messages and videos to the Russians here and on Facebook, saying that he would take all the money and all the cash from their cards. I mean, they don't take this money from their cards, and he's gonna take it and send it to Ukrainians. So sanctions, yes, they hit the Russian economy a bit. In the supermarkets, concerning products and food and everything, no one is worried and no one buys big quantities of food and no one is scared, because now Russians become more and more patriotic because they know that this is the moment to stop the US and the European Union.
All right, this is when it comes to Russian nationals and what's new on the ground regarding life in Ukraine, or at least when it comes to Kiev. Here joins me live Anastasia Pashniak, English teacher from the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Anastasia, what can you tell us a little bit about life in Ukraine after a couple of days of military operation? Again, Anastasia, how is life in Ukraine so far, and especially in the place where you are based?
Hello, my name is Anastasia and I'm from Ukraine. I'm 30 and I'm a mother of 2 kids. 7 days ago, I woke up in Kiev after the rockets, and at the beginning, I could not believe. And when I started to wake up my husband, he thought that I'm joking. I started to receive messages from my friends from Kharkov that they started massive shooting, they started bombing. And she texted me and she told me, pack everything that you need and leave. Then my husband heard another shooting and he understood that I'm not joking. And then we started to check the news, of course, and we saw that Russia invaded Ukraine at night without warning, without anything. We saw that Kharkiv is on fire. And we heard explosions near the area, basically where we live. We live near the airport, Juliane, and as you know, now they trying to hit all the airports, and as they say in
Anastasia,
Russia, and all the news.
This happened like 7 days ago, and now talking about today, do you feel safe in Kiev along with other civilians?
We left Kiev because we have 2 kids and we spent like almost 15 hours in the car. We are 24/7 with all the friends who stayed in Kiev, who are fighting. We don't feel safe. Every night before we go to sleep, we wishing each other a safe night. Every 10 minutes we checking the news, we hear siren. Now we in the west part of Ukraine, and where, as you have been following the news, almost like all Ukraine moved. Unfortunately, we have explosions here. Even before I talked to you, my sister, she said that her compound had explosion. We are close to the border now. Amount of refugees is less than at the beginning, but I don't think it's safe anywhere.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, for bringing all of these insights. So when it comes to life of the civilian Ukrainians amid the escalated tensions between Russians and Ukraine, well, we move on to the Ukrainian president, who attended a meeting of the European Parliament where he urged the bloc to support his country. From its part, Russia denies claims that Moscow wants to invade Ukraine and that its troops will leave as soon as their operation come to an end. Nabil Khazini reports.
A day after signing an official request to join the European Union, Volodymyr Zelensky attended an extraordinary session of the European Parliament. The Ukrainian president was given there a standing ovation.
The Ukrainian regime has pursued a course of aggressive de-Russification and forced assimilation all these years. People who consider themselves Russians and would like to preserve their identity, language and culture are being told directly that they are strangers in Ukraine.
The EU reaffirmed its support to Ukraine during its local crisis, but officials announced the decision to put Kiev on the path to join the 27 member states would take years of reforms for Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine has raised concerns in Western countries, while the Russian Defense Ministry stated that Moscow does not intend to occupy Ukraine and that troops will leave the country once the operation ends.
Russia did not start hostilities. Russia is ending them. It had to be stopped. The Kiev regime's endless threats to Russia had to be stopped, and Russia has done it.
Western countries have started imposing economic and financial sanctions against Moscow. Sberbank Group, Russia's main bank, has announced that it is withdrawing from the European market after being hit by sanctions.
Well, and for more insights regarding the report that you have just watched, Kim is joining us, and he's the founder CEO of Strategic Pan-Indo-Pacific Arena Consultancy from Malaysia. What do you think about the EU session where they have tackled Ukraine's? Why do you think Ukraine president has asked the bloc to prove its support? Doesn't he think that he has enough support so far when it comes to military or humanitarian aids?
Well, personally, first of all, I would like to convey my regards to one of the guests, Ms. Anastasia, and also Dr. Julia, because I can sense that neither one of them really want this kind of conflict to take place. So both of you have my utmost empathy, and I hope that a solution will be found to allow both sides to have a peaceful resolution. Coming back to your question as to whether European Union should be doing more, I think what European Union has been doing has been far more extensive and elaborate than what it could otherwise have done. And a lot of what we are watching right now is basically guided by an action-reaction dynamic between Ukraine and European Union. So, for instance, when President Zelensky writes a letter to European Union and then European Union convenes a session to try to consider the admissions of Ukraine into European Union, to me that is just sheer theatrics, because it actually takes a long time to become a full member of the European Union. 10, 15 years. If you look at Turkey, it's taken forever. So, but that's precisely what President Zelensky is looking for. He's looking for that kind of theatrical impact that can actually galvanize and garners everyone's attention, the global audience attention, on the fate of Kyiv, because he said so himself. Kyiv is the heart of Ukraine. If it stops beating, then the entire Ukraine would have fallen. And as I'm speaking right now, I have been getting feedbacks from my consultants in London that Russian troops in columns after columns of tanks, to the extent of 40 miles, are actually making their way to Kyiv to put it under siege. And I don't think it's going to be an easy military victory. You have
Why do you think, taking into consideration the fact that Russia beholds on or is actually one of the major or main military powers in the world, why don't you think it's taking so long for Russia to take on Kyiv?
Well, it's taking so long because, first of all, Russia's request, in a very ironic way, is very simple. Do not try to express your aspirations to join North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is NATO. Do not try any attempts to join European Union. And also restore the language rights of the Russian minorities all over Ukraine, which has been banned. So I think, in spite of the massive number of troops that the Russians have deployed, the psychological effect is actually to awe and intimidate the Ukrainian leadership into submitting to the will of Russia.
Julia has said something quite important a bit earlier when she said that apparently she doesn't see, according to Julia, that things will not be solved as soon as possible or as we might think. Do you agree with her?
I do agree with her completely because she knows the ground, because she knows Russia better than I do. And Dr. Julia is one of the leading intellectuals on Russia, on Iran, on Middle East. And I'm very sure that her sources are very valid, and so is her analysis.
So why do you think that we won't see an appeasement in the crisis itself, even though negotiations are on the table so far?
Well, we have to understand what kind of negotiations that are taking place. If they are negotiations strictly between Ukraine and Russia, I think the trust is not there, or the gap in the confidence, or the confidence deficit is too large for the two sides to try to talk their way out of the current imbroglio, the current quagmire. What you really need is a major actor such as China coming in and then telling both sides, we have invested 30 billion US dollars in Ukraine over the last 5 years. We want to make sure that everything can result in a win-win situation for every stakeholder, because right now, if we go to war, the loser is actually not just Russia or Ukraine, or vice versa. It's actually the whole world, because the global world order is resting on the outcome of what is happening in Kyiv, because this could, in more ways than one, be a repeat of the run-up to the events that eventually led to the eruption of World War II.
All right, Kim. Well, let's go back to Anastasia, who is based actually in Kiev. And I would like to ask you, Anastasia, about, since our political experts are saying here, we are not likely to see a breakthrough into this crisis anytime soon, even though negotiations are on the table. Don't you think, where you are based and on the ground, that things in which direction are taking place?
Well, first of all, I would not call it a crisis. I would call it a war, because it's not a crisis anymore. People die, they're hitting schools and civilians. I don't think it's going to stop soon either, because what they're asking, one of the most important things that was discussed on the first round of negotiations was that they want to take Crimea without any potential of us getting it back. As you, maybe you know, maybe you don't, today was supposed to be the second round, so we're expecting. And also their demand is for us to give up. They want us to put down the weapons, and it's not going to happen. So that's why it's not going to finish soon. As army,
and do you think, Anastasia, since you are calling it a war, according to yourself, do you think that the Ukrainians will stand still in the face of the military forces of Russia?
I can't, respond to that. We're trying, we're fighting. People taking the guns, they're protecting their areas, except army. We're creating small legions of people, of men who are responsible for each district. Men who put their families safe on the west part of Ukraine. They're bringing help, they're bringing weapons from foreign countries, and they're moving it back to Kyiv. So we're going to stand till the end. And there is no other chance, of course. We have been fighting for the last 8 years for our lands. We have been fighting without any weapons on Maidan in 2013 and 2014. Now we have weapons, we have help, and we have our people. We have 80,000 people who traveled from abroad, 80,000 Ukrainians who arrived from abroad here, and they're ready to fight.
Yeah,
We're going to stand till the last.
I might ask you such a very daring question here, and I would like to say that we have seen throughout media that even children were taught how to flee from war zones in this case, or how to hold a gun. Do you think this is a healthy society for the Ukrainians in the upcoming, let's say we're talking about a whole generation in the coming future, for example? Don't you think that Ukrainians should at least give up, and because they cannot probably stand in the face of Russia in this case, better than raising a non-homogeneous, let's say, society? We are seeing elderlies, we are seeing children, women getting engaged in war.
What can I tell you? Again, sorry, I have no idea where you're getting this news. We don't teach kids to hold the guns. Maybe it's Russian
but we
propaganda.
have seen it. We have seen, we won't say probably they are holding guns, but they are watching their mothers holding guns. They are watching their fathers who probably were working. We have seen this on the news. It's available everywhere.
Well, this is propaganda, or it's not true, because we don't teach kids here. Also, you know, in 2013, Russia was saying that in west part of Ukraine, we eat kids. So I'm absolutely terrified to hear what you just mentioned. Trust me, mothers, they're doing here a great job, as much as the fathers doing their in the fight zones. We are teaching our kids at home. We're creating online channels with fairy tales. We're creating online channels with cartoons. We're helping each other with some cute kids games, because we are taking total control of our kids' mental health. Kids, they understand that there is something happening because people had to leave their houses and they're not coming back. Kids, they have to understand that there is something happening because for 5 or 6 days, they're living in the subway stations. Kids, they have to understand that something happening because they see pregnant women giving a birth in the subway station because the hospital was just bombed. But according of this, we're taking care of their mental health, and all this idea of that we are raising the society like this, it's not true. And I'm highly, you know, against this news.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Anastasia. It is just reporting what we are watching in the news. And now we just move to a live event in a bit. And we are going to move on in our live coverage and responding to a package of Western sanctions. The Kremlin announced that these sanctions will never make Russia change its position on Ukraine. This happens after Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russia will respond to the Western sanctions based on its own interests. The spokesman also claimed that Russia has the required potential to compensate the damage made by the sanctions. All right. Apparently, we are supposed to go for a live event where Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, is giving a speech and talking about the sanctions imposed on Russia. We are not ready for this live coverage so far. But back to you, Anastasia. What do you think about the economic sanctions that are imposed on Russian economy? Don't you think, on the other side, that the civilians will pay for the, let's say, for the crimes or for the sanctions being imposed on Russian politicians and in the economy of Russia in general?
From bottom of my heart, I honestly feel sorry about what will happen to civilians in Russia, because I understand that they blocked everything, and I understand that a lot of people will have hunger, a lot of people will have problems with clothes, and of course some materialistic stuff like cars, phones, and gadgets. I do understand, but what we are asking Russians to do is to stand up for themselves, go speak out, They are scared if they're going to go to the squares to protest, they're going to go to the jail.
But Anastasia, Russians have protested and they were detained for the sake of Ukrainians. Don't you think they are like standing still in the face, let's say, of Putin's regime in order to speak for the rights of the Ukrainians in this case? They are making some sacrifices.
Yeah, they started to protest and they started to show us their support. That's why, trust me, Ukrainians will not leave them. And a lot of people who will say that we want to go to Ukraine, they will be welcome here. And we're welcoming refugees from Russia. You know, even today, the army, one soldier, he came, Russian soldier, he came and he gave up his weapons and we took him to the hospital. We fixed his, he was wounded. Our doctors working on him and they gave him food and they gave him tea and they accept him, you know. So we're always happy to see any Russian person in Ukraine who is against the situation. But the point that there are still some Russians that they say that Putin is doing right. Mm-hmm. You know, Putin is doing right. The way he is shooting houses, it's okay. I'm telling you from the point of a lot of Ukrainians, because we are now everyone online. We are very sorry for what will happen to Russia. But the point, what is happening to economic now, because Putin is just being stubborn and he doesn't care about his own nation.
This is according to you, Anastasia. Thank you so much for bringing all of these insights. And now we move to a live event where Boris Johnson, United Kingdom Prime Minister, is giving a speech and talking about economic sanctions on Russia. Let's follow together.
With Sergei Lavrov, but there is no limit to what we can do on his regime, and we will continue to do that. Can I just echo what he said about our bond, our debt to the Ukrainian people? Never forget when we stood side by side with Russia in the 1940s against fascism, Mr. Speaker. There was a Ukrainian army. A Ukrainian contribution to that army was 10 million people, and they were absolutely invaluable in freedom as well.
Angela Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, Scotland stands ready to welcome any fleeing Ukrainians. However, this government has failed to follow the example of the European Union of a red tape visa-free approach. Will this Prime Minister commit to an unconditional, rapid, safe and legal approach to settlement for Ukrainians fleeing this invasion? Why is he failing to do so?
Mr. Speaker, as I've explained to the House already several times, the EU has a border-free Schengen zone. It's not appropriate for them to have checks of any kind. We've got a different system. It is sensible, given the situation that we have and given the large numbers of people leaving that war zone. It's sensible to have checks and to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that we know who is coming in. But what we will not do is impede Ukrainians coming in fear of their lives. This country, as I've said several times today, has a proud record of taking people in. Look at what we've already done in Afghanistan. Look at the record just under my premiership. Look at what we've done to help people from Afghanistan. Look at what we've done to help the Hong Kong Chinese. She should be proud of what the UK is doing.
That ends Prime Minister's questions. Point of order. Just let the chamber just settle down. Who was the other one?
And we have just followed the speech of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking in front of members of Parliament. When asked about the Schengen zone, he just said it clearly that he welcomes all Ukrainians, and he spoke about the United Kingdom as a life saver, and they are taking Ukrainians. And with this, that's all for today coverage. World News program is up next. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.